Hello, I'm Nafis Ali, and today we will be discussing about the history of the MBTA Red Line, Pullman Standard 15 and 1600 series, Type 1 Rapid Transit series, also known as the South Shore Cars or the Silverbirds. I'll be diving into the creation of these cars, designing, engineering, manufacturing, delivery, service life, retirement, and scrapping. This will be a full-length video discussing every aspect of these cars, so please sit and enjoy. A side note, in making of this video, I have used a lot of reference materials in order to show what event is taking place. Any reference clips and images I have used in making of this video have been sourced. This video is also demonetized, and its main purpose is to teach people about transit history in Boston, Massachusetts. Now let's dive into the history of the Pullman Standard 15 and 1600 series. Chapter 1. The South Shore Extension. It was the 1960s. At the time, the Red Line ran from Harvard Square, Cambridge, Massachusetts to Ashmont Station in Dorchester, Boston, Massachusetts. At the time, the Red Line had recently purchased rolling stock, which were the 1962-1963 Pullman Standard 1400 series Type 5 Cambridge Dorchester cars, consisting 92 units, numbered 1400 to 1491. At the time, the T was planning to extend the Red Line from Dorchester further into South Shore, Massachusetts. On July 28, 1965, the T signed an agreement with the New Haven Railroad to purchase 11 miles 13 kilometers of the former rail right-of-way of the Old Colony Railroad from South Braintree, Massachusetts to the Fort Point Channel in South Boston, Massachusetts. This would be for the new South Shore extension of the Red Line and would also start a new branch on the former Old Colony Railroad, with subsidizing remaining commuter rail service of the former Old Colony Railroad with $1.2 million. Eventually, construction began in 1966. The new South Shore extension would start from Andrews Station, then continuing on surface level, running side by side with the Ashmont branch, then traveling down 5 miles, leaving Boston and entering the city of Quincy, crossing the Neponset River. Once reaching Quincy, the line would make 3 stops at North Quincy, Wollaston, and terminate at Quincy Center. This would be a 7.6-mile distance between Quincy Center Station and Andrews Station. Chapter 2: The Mock-Up. With the construction of the South Shore branch beginning in 1966, the T needed a newer fleet for the Red Line, as passengers were increasing, and for the newly opened extension. Now, the current Type 5 fleet at the time lacked modern technology and didn't have the requirements for the 7.6-mile South Shore extension. On July 10, 1966, the T designed a mock-up car in the South Shore Residents Rotary Club as a proposal of what the new South Shore cars would be like. The T teamed up with the authority's planning department and Cambridge 7 INC, began engineering, designing, sketching, and concluded what the new South Shore car would be like. Chapter 3: The Contract. With the mock-up car approved, the T contracted Pullman Standard of South Shore, Chicago, Illinois, with a $13 million contract signed on November 23, 1967, to construct 76 new Rapid Transit series. The first 24 cars, numbered 1500 to 1523, were ordered to feature operating caps on the front and rear ends of each car, and were designed as single units, allowing one car to operate without it being coupled to another car. The other 52 cars, numbered 1600 to 1651, followed the mock-up of being conjoined to its assigned pair and only featuring one operator's cap on the front. Chapter 4: Engineering. After the T gave the contract to Pullman Standard, the team at Pullman began engineering and designing of what the new cars would be like. The undercarriage equipment would consist of 4 100-horsepower Westinghouse 1460B traction motors, with 2 equipped to each underpart. Each undercarriage material was constructed from General Steel. These would be equipped with Wabco compressors, XCB 248 Westinghouse control systems. These would use SMEE braking, which uses electrical signals which equalizes braking effort for the train and combines air compression braking. These cars would be run by a steel spring propulsion system. These trains would also feature an automatic train control and a bypass mode feature. These trains would be powered by 600 VD high voltage through third rail shoes equipped to the undercarriage of each car. These would use Tomlinson-style couplers to connect to each car. The undercarriage consists of 8 sets of wheels, 4 attached to each underpart. The exterior would use aluminum steel, which would be forged into shape, then cut into proper size. The front would have 4 headlights, 2 on the roof and 2 on the bottom half of each car. An anti-climber on the bottom, 2 panel bumpers for the front of each car. These had 2 safety fiberglass windows installed on the front, one with a windshield. These would have a center door installed on the front of the car and the back of the car. These cars would have a 26 x 42 inches large windows for an outside landscape view, also tinted reflective coating windows to keep natural sunlight and an airy feel, also designed to prevent too much sunlight. These cars would feature 6 destination little signs, 5 for the 1600 series, 2 each side of the car, 1 in the front, the other one on the back for the 1500 series. These cars would also feature glow-up number plates. These trains would have 6 embodied electropneumatic doors with 3 each side, which are 4 feet 6 inches wide and 6 feet 6 inches tall. Now for the operator's cab, each 1500 series would have two cabs, one on the front and the other one on the back, and each car would be designed to operate without being coupled to another car. On the other hand, each 1600 series car would only have one cab per each car and would be required to be coupled to another car facing the other direction. The cab would feature a hand crate controller designed and manufactured by WAPCO, a microphone on the front, and two side coiled microphones next to the operator's cab side windows. It would feature an air gauge, speed indicator, an automatic train control, cab signaling, a couple switch, disconnector, uncouple switch, door signal switch, radio and public address systems, windshield button, air horn, and a reset feature. The cab would also feature a leather cushion bucket seat for the operator to sit. The overall operator's cab would be 10 feet wide, 6 feet 7 inches tall, and 3 feet 4 inches in depth. The interior would have brown nylon carpet for the flooring, formed ABS plastic for the walls and paneling, vinyl covered aluminum for the interior ceiling. These would have 2 rows of fluorescent lighting with shielded source diffusers to control lighting and glare, air conditioning with 12 tons added in each car next to the doors, and heating units which would be also added. These would have 64 leather cushion bucket seats, which are 40 inches wide when 2 seats are combined. These were made from rubber and cushion. These would also be equipped with pedestals. These would have stainless steel poles and hand strips attached. Each car would carry about 126 passengers, with each pair holding about 239 passengers. These cars would also have an emergency assistance button and bell chimes for the doors. These cars would be 69 feet 6 inches long, 10 feet wide, and 12 feet tall. These would stand 66 passengers, have 12 longitudinal seats, and 52 transverse seats. These cars would be able to accelerate up to 70 miles per hour with a 2.82 nominal acceleration. These cars would generally operate up to 50 miles on the South Shore branch. Each even number car weighed about 93,868 pounds, and each odd number car weighed about 95,188 pounds. The exterior body would be silver from its natural aluminum body, and a thin stripe of red which would be added to accommodate the red line, with the T logo also added. Chapter 5: Manufacturing. Once the T approved the design, manufacturing and assembly of the new South Shore cars immediately began in 1968 at the Pullman Standard factory in South Shore, Chicago. Installation of the undercarriage components such as wheels, axles, wires, compressors, traction motors, intake motor, monomotor, and third rail shoes were installed. Aluminum steel being used for the car body was cut, shaped, and designed, forming the exterior body. Once the car body and the undercarriage were finished, they were assembled together. Interior flooring, ceiling, walling, paneling, seats, poles, lights, and electrical equipment were installed. Windshield, lights, and destination signs were installed for the exterior body. Now the team added a thin stripe of red with the T logo in order to represent the MBTA and the red line. Once the first batch of cars were ready, they were now ready for delivery. Chapter 6: Entering the Main Line. On August 4th, 1969, the first completed cars were delivered by rail from the Pullman Standard factory in South Shore, Chicago, to the Penn Central-owned Dover Street Rail facility in South Boston, Massachusetts. The crews then moved the trains from the Dover Street Rail facility to the main junction of the Red Line between Columbia Road Station and Andrews Station, then driving them to the Elliott Street Maintenance Facility in Harvard Square, Cambridge, where the Red Line trains were maintained and stored at the time. On September 25, 1969, Bostonians were given a chance to enter the new South Shore cars. Eventually, after testing, on December 11th of 1969, the first set of the new 15 and 1600 series hit the rails for revenue service, running from Harvard Square Station to Ashmont Station. The first 4 concepts to run revenue service were units numbered 1500, 1501, 1600, and 1601. Eventually, by December of 1970, all 76 cars were delivered and now in active service. The new South Shore extension was opened to the public on September 1st of 1971. The 15 and 1600 series fleet operated both on the South Shore and the Ashmont branch, while the 1400 fleet remained operating on the Ashmont branch. Chapter 7: Silverbirds. Bostonians nicknamed these cars as the Silverbirds for their natural aluminum finish with a stripe of red added to symbolize the Red Line. Now, the Red Line originally opened back in 1912 as the Cambridge-Dorchester line because the line originally ran from Harvard Square Station in Cambridge to Ashmont Station in Dorchester, and that's why the line was originally named the Cambridge-Dorchester line. The Cambridge-Dorchester line was formerly under the ownership of the Boston Elevated Railway until 1947. In 1947, the Boston Elevated Railway became the Metropolitan Transit Authority, or known as the MTA, until in 1964, the MTA was later rebranded as the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, or the MBTA as we know today. Now, the MBTA, or known as the T, chose to rebrand their rapid transit systems based off color. Now, the Cambridge-Dorchester line was chosen to be the Red Line because the line passed by Harvard University, in which its color scheme was red. So that's why the Red Line is called the Red Line. These were the first cars ever to be purchased by the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, which was created in 1964. These were the first subway cars in Boston to adapt the color scheme. These had a thin stripe of red to symbolize the Red Line and the Harvard University, in which the Red Line was named after. These were the first subway cars in Boston to feature advanced technology of the 20th century, such as embodied electric doors, cab signaling, and automatic train control, air conditioning, and being able to accelerate up to 70 miles per hour, and more advanced technology of the time and era. These cars were branded as the Pullman Standard 15 and 1600 series Type 1 Red Line cars. In 1972, a wayside in-car noise and vibration level measurement was conducted on the Red Line for the Department of Transportation. This was exclusively measuring the noise levels, vibrations on the 15 and 1600 series on the South Shore branch. Chapter 8: 1970s and 1980s era. On December 13 of 1969, the T purchased 24 acres of land of the Dover Street Rail facility from Penn Central, paying about $7 million to Penn Central. This is to construct the new maintenance rail facility for the Red Line and a bus garage which can hold about 200 buses. This would be the new Cabot Street Maintenance Facility car house of the Red Line. This is where Red Line trains would now be stored, maintained, and repaired if they broke down, and would serve a bus garage which could fit about 200 buses. Eventually, in 1971, construction of the new Cabot Maintenance Facility began, and by 1976, the new Cabot Shops was now open, with all equipment being moved from the Elliott Street Maintenance Facility in Harvard to Cabot Street Maintenance Facility in South Boston. Eventually, the old Elliott Street Shops in Cambridge was demolished and sold to U.S. government, where the present-day JFK Park in the Harvard Kennedy School sits. On August 1st of 1975, a horrific incident on the Red Line would occur between Charles MGH and Park Street. Cambridge Dorchester Type 5 lead car 1402 came to a halt at signal 236 due to a backed-up train in the front. Behind 1402's set, Red Line Type 1 lead car 1604 was coordinated by signal 234 and struck 1402's set at 4:58 p.m. 3 minutes later, Type 5 lead car 1431 collided into 1604's set, injuring 154 passengers. Luckily, rescue teams showed up, evacuated everyone, and all passengers were hospitalized. It was later revealed that due to a malfunction on the train's stop tripper and operations on 1604 and 1431, which were violated, led to the cause of the incident. 1604 and 1605 received severe damage from the incident and reached beyond repair. 1604 and 1605 were later stored for counterparts, until eventually being later scrapped at Codman Yard in mid-February of 2011. Now, in the late 1970s and the early 1980s, the MBTA began extending the Red Line further, with the Red Line being extended to Quincy Adams and Braintree from 1978 to 1983, also to Porter Square, Davis Square, and Alewife from 1978 to 1985. In the 1980s, the T began planning on extending all station platforms on the red and orange lines to transition from 4-car train sets to 6-car train sets. In 1983, revenue service on the Red Line was increasing significantly, in which the T needed more cars. Chapter 9. More Pullmans. As part of the Southeast Braintree Extension, Northwest Alewife Extension, 6-car platform extension, and revenue service increasing on the Red Line, the T was in urgent need of more subway cars on the line. So the T looked forward to another company which would potentially construct 58 more identical pairs of the existing 15 and 1600 series fleet. On January 17th of 1984, the T contracted Urban Transportation Development Corporation, or UTDC, to construct 58 identical copies of the original 1968-1970 Type 1 cars and would be branded as the Type 2 cars. These would be numbered 1700 to 1757. Each Type 2 series car would be manufactured as single units, with each car only having one operator's cab on each car, but feature a master control box in the rear end of the car with a keyhole to allow single car operations for maintenance purposes and yard moves. Each 1700 series car would be constructed from the same materials used for the original Type 1 cars, although to cut off budget, glow sign number plates would be cut off and its car number would just be painted. The 1700 series would have 62 leather cushioned bucket seats installed, although installed completely different from the original Type 1 cars. Instead, these were individual seats attached to the walling. This is to allow more standing. Instead of going for the natural aluminum finish with a thin stripe of red, these were painted bright red cherry on the bottom half with a T logo added, white in the top half, and a shade of gray for the roof. Manufacturing of the new Type 2 cars began in 1986 at the Canadian Car Foundry in Montreal, Canada. Deliveries of the new 1700 series began in July of 1987 from Montreal, Canada to Boston, Massachusetts. Once delivered to the T, these began testing at the cabin maintenance facility in South Boston, Massachusetts. Eventually, after testing, on December 30th of 1987, the first set, consisting units 1705, 1704, 1700, 1701, and the second set, 1709 and 1708, coupled with a Type 1 pair, 1628 and 1629, ran revenue service. Eventually, more of the tested 1700 series were placed into active service in 1988. By January 31st of 1989, all 58 cars were delivered. By April 5th, 1989, all 58 cars were in active service, operating as train line coupled with the existing Type 1 cars of 6-car train sets. Chapter 10: Life Extension. With the new UTDC 1700 series Type 2 Red Line cars creating a boost for revenue service, and for the Pullman Standard 15 and 1600 series Type 1 Red Line cars, with the new Alewife extension, the T chose to rebuild and give a mid-life overhaul to the existing 15 and 1600 series. From the years 1985 to 1989, 74 cars were rebuilt and overhauled inside the cabin maintenance facility in South Boston. With this overhaul, the interior seating of the 15 and 1600 series was changed and rearranged, with 63 seats being installed on the 1500 series and 64 seats being installed on the 1600 series attached to the walls, as to allow more space for standing. With this overhaul, the 1500 series had their rear end operator's cab removed in order to cut off costs for maintaining and to create more space. Despite the second operator's cab being removed from the 1500 series, the 1500 series still remain as single units and can operate from both ends, with a hand crank being left in the rear ends of the 1500 series, which allows for rear end operations. Finally, during the overhaul, all 15 and 1600 series were repainted to bright red cherry on the bottom half, white on the top half, and gray for the roof. In 1989, the T began looking for a replacement for the 1963 Pullman Standard 1400 series. The T in 1990 contracted Bombardier to construct the new Type 3 Red Line cars, or the 1800 series, to replace the 1963 Pullman Standard 1400 fleet. Now, the Type 1 fleet reached 21 years of age with a recent overhaul. Now, with the technical issues with the existing 1400 fleet, which rolled out 6 years prior to the Type 1 fleet, the T had doubts on how many more years the Type 1 fleet would serve. The T thought of ordering additional cars from Bombardier to replace the existing 15 and 1600 series fleet before the new millennium, although this never happened, and the T had high hopes that the 15 and 1600 series fleet would serve an additional decade of service. Chapter 11: 2000s Era. In 2008, cars 1608 and 1609 derailed at Cadgate Yard south of Braintree Station. 1608 and 1609 were later brought into cabbage shops, where it would be decommissioned and then moved to Codman Yard, where it would sit there and serve as donor parts to maintain the rest of the fleet. Also, during this time, the leather cushion bucket seats on the 15, 16, 17, and 1800 series were removed and replaced with just regular carpet seats. This was done in order to combat vandalism and to cut off maintenance costs of cleaning. At this point of time, the Type 1 fleet reached 40 years of age and began to show problems such as mechanical and electrical failures. And in order to address this problem, the T in 2008 began thinking for a replacement for the Type 1 cars. Although this would not happen yet due to several circumstances. This would mainly be because the T was low in cash at the time. At the time, the T had a debt of $5 billion from the Big Dig project, and also due to the 2008 financial crisis, stock markets crashed and ridership dropped, leading to a huge profit loss in many transit agencies in the United States. Also, the T recently replaced its older rolling stock on the green and blue lines, and the T wasn't receiving enough funds or had enough money to replace the old Type 1 cars on the red line, so the T had high hopes that the Type 1 cars would serve an additional decade of service until a replacement came. Since the T wasn't replacing the 15 and 1600 fleet yet, several more issues began to show up within these cars. One of those issues was when operating on the snow. Snow would jam up the wheels and get into the undercarriage motor equipments, and would also cause ice buildups within the undercarriage equipment and the frame of the car, leading to malfunctions and breakdowns. With these issues showing up on the 15 and 1600 series, the T finally began looking for a replacement. On August 20 of 2010, the T programmed an in-house overhaul for the UTDC 1700 series inside the cabbage shops in South Boston. This would be for a service life extension and to run a couple more years until a replacement came. On July 27th of 2011, cars 1706 and 1707 entered the overhaul program and were refurbished. Eventually, on December 1st of 2016, the last two cars numbered 1716 and 1717 entered the overhaul program and were refurbished. During this time, MassDOT awarded the MBTA a total of $1.3 billion to replace its aging rolling stock on the red and orange lines. The T decided to replace the old orange line cars on the orange line first, then the red line, as the ones on the orange line were suffering more than the red line. The T initially planned to order 74 cars to replace the 40-year-old 15 and 1600 series fleet, as that fleet was suffering the most and needed urgent replacement. However, the T later chose to increase it to 132 cars to also replace the UTDC 1700 series fleet. Despite the recent overhaul, the fleet reached 26 years of age, and there was no guarantee on how many more years the fleet would serve. Eventually, in 2014, the T placed up a bid on who would construct the next generation for the red and orange lines, and CRRC of China won the contract to construct the new red and orange line cars. CRRC was the lowest bidder, and the MBTA was already in financial debt, and that's why the T awarded the contract to CRRC. On October 22nd of 2014, the T signed the agreement with CRRC to order 132 cars for the red line, branded as the Type 4 red line cars, and 152 cars for the orange line, with a total cost of $566.6 billion. On December 12 of 2016, the T agreed to purchase an additional 120 cars from CRRC and pay an additional $277 million to CRRC to replace the Bombardier Type 3 1800 fleet, as there was no guarantee on how many more years the 1800 fleet would serve. Chapter 12: Accidents and Derailments. On June 29th of 2015, a horrific incident would occur on the Red Line. Lead car 1619 came approaching Quincy Center, although had a malfunction leading to 1619 catching on fire. Passengers were scared and began smashing windows in order to get out of the train. After an investigation, it was later revealed that 1619 had a propulsion issue leading to the cause of the fire. 1618 and 1619 were later repaired and returned back to active service. On December 10 of 2015, a horrific incident would occur on the Red Line. Operator of lead car 1502 was at Braintree Station with 50 passengers aboard on 1502's set. The operator of lead car 1502 was setting the train to bypass mode in order to pass a broken signal at Braintree Station. However, due to several misfollowed steps, 1502 left Braintree Station without an operator, traveling on its own, until stopping at North Quincy Station when the Operations Control Center cut the power of the third rail. After an investigation, it showed that a microphone cord was wrapped around the operator's hand crank and that he flipped a switch underneath the train which triggers the bypass mode and let the train go on its own. The operator was supposed to engage a brake before flipping the switch underneath the train. However, he misfollowed that step, leading to this horrific incident. Despite the main cause of this incident being the operator's fault, the train set itself used outdated technology from the 1960s, in which these did not measure the safety standards of the 21st century. Modern trains like the Bombardier 1800 series, purchased back in the 1990s, had modern technology which was suitable for the 21st century and followed safety measures. The Type 3 fleet had this ultra-modern spring-loaded hand crank in which when the operator is controlling it and holding onto the hand crank, the train would accelerate. But when the operator would release the hand crank, the train would go into a halt and the hand crank would return to its original position. The old Type 1 and Type 2 fleet did not feature this feature and used old WAPCO hand cranks from the 1960s. A couple years later, another horrific incident would occur on the Red Line. On February 21st of 2018, at 9:20 a.m., a Red Line train was heading northbound to Alewife and was about approaching Andrews Station. However, the rear two cars of that train set, 1742 and 1743, derailed and later derailed by itself and came to a halt at Andrews Station. Passengers aboard on 1742 and 1743 described the incident as windows were shattering and breaking through, which led to a horrific sight. It was later reported that 1742 and 1743 had a motor failure, which led to the cause of this incident. 1742 and 1743 were later repaired and returned back to active service. On June 11th of 2019, around 6 o'clock a.m., lead car 1602 heading southbound to Braintree was approaching JFK UMass Station. Before approaching JFK UMass, 1602 said derailed off tracks and destroyed a signal box on the way. before coming to a halt at JFK, UMass. 60 passengers were aboard on 1602 set, with everyone being safely evacuated with no injuries except for one person. After an investigation, it was revealed that 1602 had a fractured axle, which led to the cause of this incident. It was later revealed that there was an issue with the brush assembly underneath the train. Now, the brush receives electricity from the motor and moves it on to the ring wrapped around the axle, which then moves it through the wheels and into the rails. Now, a normal functional ring would be made out of slick clean steel, which would be sealed off from the environment to prevent it being worn down. However, the ring next to the fractured axle from 1602 was heavily rusted and almost destroyed. In December of 2018, a maintenance inspection was done on cars 1602 and 1603, and it was listed that the assembly itself was missing the cover that kept it sealed. But the inspection workers did not closely look at the rings for damage. Another inspection was conducted on 1602 and 1603 in May of 2019, a month before the derailment, and it was stated that two different brush parts were replaced on the train that derailed, but no workers caught the damage to the ring itself. Now, the wheel axle was constructed back in 1992 and reached 27 years of age. 1602 and 1603 received severe damage from the derailment and reached beyond repair. 1602 and 1603 were later decommissioned and moved to the north of Capit Yard, where it would sit there and serve as counterparts to maintain the rest of the fleet. Now in 2019, the Pullman Standard 15 and 1600 series fleet reached 50 years of age and was in an overdue retirement. Any typical subway car would last from 25 to 40 years. However, for the 15 and 1600 series, they were in an overdue retirement and needed to be replaced. However, the new Red Line cars weren't arriving just yet, and the T had no choice but to continue operating the Type 1 fleet. Eventually, manufacturing and production of the new CRRC 1900 series Type 4 Red Line cars began, and the T received its first pilot cars in fall of 2019 for testing. Eventually, on December 30th of 2020, the first set of the new CRRC Type 4 Red Line cars hit the rails for revenue service. It was projected that all 252 cars would be delivered by 2022. However, due to the pandemic with staffing limitations within the CRRC factories, it was delayed up to 2024. However, issues with the new red and orange line fleet began to show, and the fleet was removed from service multiple times. On March 16th of 2021, a CRRC train set on the orange line derailed at Wellington Station, leading to the new red and orange line cars being pulled away from service. Until after investigation, they were returned back to service on January of 2022. However, in June of 2022, the new red and orange line cars were pulled away from service again after a battery explosion on a CRRC train set on the orange line at Wellington Station. They did later return back to service in July of 2022. At this time, only 6 of the new CRRC trains on the Red Line were delivered, in which is not enough at all to replace any older cars on the Red Line. Initially, the T was choosing to replace its older Orange Line cars first because they were the ones suffering more than on the Red Line, and once the Orange Line is midway completed, then the T would shift focus on the Red Line. On September 28th of 2021 at 9:45 a.m., lead car 1745 was heading northbound to Alewife and was about approaching Broadway Station. Once arriving at Broadway Station, 1745's rear car, 1744, derailed off tracks and collided within the station platforms at Broadway Station, causing a window to shatter out. A passenger aboard on 1745 said described the scene to be horrific as the train slammed itself violently and dragged itself forward. 47 passengers were aboard on 1745 said. Luckily, all 47 passengers were safely evacuated and no injuries were found. After an investigation, it was later revealed that a bolt had showed up on the tracks, which may have caused 1744 to derail at Broadway Station, although there was no official determination of the cause of the derailment. 1744 and 1745 were permanently retired, decommissioned, and stored north of Cabot Yard, where it would now serve as counterparts to maintain rest of the fleet. After the 2021 derailment, something much more worser was on its way. On April 10 of 2022, a tragic incident would occur on the Red Line. 39-year-old Robinson Lallen was riding car 1510. 1510 set was heading northbound to Alewife and approached Broadway Station. Once the train arriving at Broadway Station, the train opened its doors, allowing passengers to exit and enter. While Robinson was exiting car 1510, the train closed its doors on Robinson, leading to Robinson getting his arm stuck on car 1510. The operator of car 1510, without realizing, started the train and was heading for South Station, dragging Robinson on the doors and into the tunnels, eventually leading to his death. This dreadful incident led to public and media attention, and people began to show their fears for riding the MBTA. The family of Robinson Lallen was angered by this incident and was demanding the T for answers. Within the next 72 hours, the MBTA inspected all of its Red Line trains to make sure that there is no issues. Cars 1510 and 1511 were permanently retired, decommissioned, and stored north of Cabot Yard, where it would sit there for investigation. After a long investigation, it was later revealed that the cause of this incident would be a short-circuit failure on the doors of 1510. Now, Pullman manufactured these cars when any door was open within the train. The electrical circuit that allows the train to move would be incomplete, which would prevent the train from moving. However, on car 1510, the prominent wires on the master control panel was touching a mounting screw, in which this created a short circuit, which allowed the train to leave the station without all of its doors being closed. It was also later revealed by the federal investigators that they discovered that the camera monitor used by the operator of car 1510 had a 19-foot blind spot that prevented her from being able to view the car door, which was malfunctioning, as well as the car's pilot light. It was also later revealed that car 1510 was a 53-year-old subway car, part of 76 cars which were originally put into service from the years 1969 to 1970. This incident would spark tensions among T-riders and would eventually lead to a full Federal Transit Administration investigation over the MBTA system as a whole. Eventually, the FTA released its final report on the MBTA and addressed key issues on the MBTA which needs to be solved in order for the MBTA to operate without having to be reviewed by the FTA. In response to the FTA, the MBTA immediately began maintenance work on the entire MBTA systems. The MBTA placed several slow zones on the red, orange, green, and blue lines in which trains could no longer travel beyond 25 to 5 miles per hour. Riders were frustrated because due to trains now running slow, in which they'll be delayed for work, school, or a place that they need to go, in which the MBTA became a huge mess. Chapter 13: Last Stand. During the remaining months of 2022, the MBTA system was a whole mess, with slow zones everywhere and portions of the lines being closed multiple times and being replaced with shuttle buses. At this time, only 12 of the new CRRC 1900 series were delivered and weren't enough to replace the old, aging Pullman fleet. However, the Pullman fleet would not wait for the new CRRC fleet to come and replace them, in which the Pullman fleet began to suffer extremely, especially with the 1600 series fleet. Now, the 1600 series were originally manufactured with 1 compressors with each car, and the 1500 series fleet were manufactured with 2 compressors with each car. Due to the wear and tear on the compressors and the mechanical equipment, the 1600 series fleet suffered more than the 1500 series fleet. With constant breakdowns on the 1600 series fleet, the T gave up on maintaining a couple of them and decided to permanently retire a couple of the 1600 series from 2022 to 2023, in which a total of 18 cars of the 15, 16, and 1700 series were out of service and were retired, in which these were taken out of service because of accidents, derailments, and reached beyond repair from mechanical and electrical failures. However, for the remaining months of 2022 and most of 2023, no new CRRC 1900 series were delivered for the Red Line. No new Red Line cars were delivered until of October of 2023, when deliveries increased with cars 1912 and 1913 being delivered in that month. On March 29th of 2024, the T agreed to pay CRRC an additional of $148 million in order to increase production and delivery of the CRRC trains. In February of 2024, the T awarded a contract to Costello Dismantling to start removing decommissioned Red Line trains from the property of the MBTA. Eventually, in March of 2024, scrapping of the Red Line trains officially began. Eventually, by June of 2024, 18 cars were removed from property and scrapped. On June 8th of 2024, car body of 1643 was resold from Costello Dismantling to Core Investments Real Estate Development in Boston. 1643 had its undercarriage equipment removed and interior stripped apart. 1643 was later repainted and moved to 383 Dorchester Avenue in South Boston and preserved by Core Investments Real Estate Development on the lot. On November 25th of 2024, all slow zones on the Red Line were removed and trains could return back to operating 50 miles per hour. By February of 2025, 38 of the new CRRC 1900 series were delivered, with 24 now in active service. In February of 2025, cars 1620 and 1621 were removed from active service, retired, decommissioned, and prepped for scrap, indicating that scrapping will continue. Eventually, in March of 2025, cars 1610 and 1611 were loaded onto flatbed trucks and shipped to Costello Dismantling, where they would be scrapped. Eventually, by April of 2025, 26 of the 1600 series and 2 of the 1700 series were removed from property and scrapped. Previously, when the MBTA retires its older rolling stock, before scrapping all of them, the MBTA preserves the pairs and sends it to the Seashore Trolley Museum in Kennebunkport, Maine. This is where the MBTA salvaged most of its older trains, buses, and streetcars, where they can be preserved and even conduct fan trips. This is where people who are interested in old railroad equipment visit and even get a chance to ride some of them. In 1997, Seashore Trolley Museum acquired 1963 Pullman Standard Cambridge Dorchester Type 5 cars 1450 and 1455 from the Red Line. 1450 and 1455 were loaded onto flatbed trucks and escorted all the way to the Seashore Trolley Museum in Kennebunkport, Maine. Once reaching the museum, 1450 and 1455 were unloaded from flatbed trucks and remained displayed at Seashore Trolley Museum. Eventually, 20 years later, after collecting enough funds, a spring-loaded trolley pull was installed on 1450 and 1455, allowing them to operate within the museum and be able to conduct fan trips. Seashore Trolley Museum even acquired more earlier generations of the Red Line, in which Seashore Trolley Museum acquired 1928 Osgood Bradley Type 4 Cambridge Dorchester cars 709, 719, 749, 753, and 754. With Seashore acquiring each generation of the Red Line, it was believed that a pair of the old Type 1 cars would go to the Seashore Trolley Museum and be preserved. Unfortunately, this would not happen. In a previous post in which Seashore made regarding the preservation of MBTA trains, they've stated that we are not committed in acquiring any new acquisitions. When it comes to preserving heavy rail equipment from the MBTA, the T always relied on Seashore rather than any other museum to preserve heavy rail equipment. Since Seashore Trolley Museum is currently unwilling to accept anything new, the MBTA is likely to scrap all of its old Type 1 cars without saving a pair to a museum. As of May 2025, in making of this video, there is now roughly 34 active Type 1 cars, which includes 22 1500 series and 12 1600 series. For the 1700 series, there's currently 54 cars left in service, and for the 1800 series, there's 82 cars left in service. Deliveries of the new CRRC trains have increased, with cars 1942 and 1943 being delivered last month. There is right now 36 of the new CRRC 1900 series in active service. It is expected that all 252 cars will be delivered by 2027. It is estimated that last of the 1500 series will fully retire between October to November 2025. It is also predicted that last of the 1600 series will retire in summer of 2025 once the last pair breaks down and requires major repair. Since no railroad museum showed any interest on preserving a pair of the old Type 1 cars, it is predicted that all of the 15 and 1600 series fleet will be completely scrapped by the end of 2025. It is expected for the 1700 series to retire in 2026, and in 2027 the T will slowly break into the 1800 series fleet and eventually retire all of its old Red Line trains. The Type 1 fleet has served the MBTA for 55 years and have lived their service life. These trains were unique in a way in which I cannot explain and have played a huge role in transit history of Boston, Massachusetts. From its advanced technology to its classic red, white, and gray paint scheme, these trains were very unique. These trains have become a symbol of Boston, Massachusetts for serving 55 years. These trains became favorite among a lot of people, including me. From its leather cushioned seats, manual hand crank destination signs, bell chimes, and its classic design. These trains were outstanding and remarkable, one of the greatest trains of all transit history of Boston, Massachusetts. Despite these trains being great, it is now time for these trains to retire and move on. In the end of the day, these trains are 55 years old and are in urgent need of replacement. With constant mechanical and electrical failures, it's now time for these trains to move on and leave the running rails. Whether a pair being saved to a museum or not, it's time for these trains to go and move on. The legacy of these trains on the Red Line will never be forgotten and will always be remembered and cherished. Thank you, Pullman Standard, for constructing these awesome subway cars, and thank you to the MBTA for purchasing and operating these cars on the Red Line for 55 years.